Monsta Creepypasta.
This is 3 creepypasta horror stories told in second-person perspective. If you like my content, then feel free to give this video a thumbs up and possibly subscribe to my channel for future videos like this one. Now, my friends, let's make you a part of a scary story. You didn't believe the stories at first. Who would? They sounded like campfire tales told to keep kids from wandering into the woods after dark. But when it came to the absorber, there were too many stories to ignore, stories spanning centuries, talked about in every corner of the world. It had no name, not one anyone dared to speak aloud. People simply called it what it did. The absorber. It was always near children. That was its preference. Kids would see it first, standing at the edge of a playground, crouched behind a tree, or reflected faintly in a window. They'd tell their parents about the tall, pale thing with hollow eyes that watched them, its long fingers reaching, twitching. But parents wouldn't believe them, not until the electricity in their homes began to flicker and die, not until the wind grew still and the leaves outside their windows began to levitate, trembling in the air like invisible hands were lifting them. And by then, it was too late. They say the absorber isn't alive in any way we understand. It doesn't rest, it doesn't sleep, it doesn't even speak. All it does is hunt. No one knows where it came from. Some say it's been here since the earth was young, a predator born of darkness. Others whisper that it's not from this world at all, that it's something alien, something that slipped through a crack in our reality. But everyone agrees on one thing. Once it chooses you, there's no escaping it. Its touch is death, not quick, not painless. When it grabs you, its hands sink into your skin like smoke, and you feel yourself unraveling. Your body turns cold, your limbs weaken. You try to scream, but your voice is gone. All the while, it stares at you with those black, empty eyes, and then it begins to change. It molds itself into you, every detail perfect. Your face, your clothes, your voice, even the way you move. It doesn't just mimic you. It becomes you, but there's always something off. After it becomes whoever it absorbs, it doesn't smile right, it doesn't blink, and its eyes, no matter what face it wears, remain pure black voids. The stories say it's been seen throughout history, always on the edges of civilization. In the 1800s, children in a rural English village vanished one by one. Survivors claimed they saw a man lingering near the schoolhouse, but no one could agree on his appearance. He seemed different to everyone who saw him, yet he was always the same, tall, thin, and weird-looking. In the 1940s, soldiers in a war-torn forest spoke of a pale figure stalking their camps at night. They'd find their comrades gone the next morning, only to see them, or something that looked like them, standing among the trees. In every story, the signs were the same. First, the lights would flicker, no matter where you were, in a house, on a street, deep in the woods. Then, the air would grow heavy, like a storm was about to break. Rocks, twigs, and leaves would lift into the air, spinning lazily, as if caught in an unseen current. And then you'd see it, a pale figure at the edge of your vision, watching you. They say you can't run from it. It doesn't move fast, but it doesn't have to. It always knows where you are. You can lock your doors, turn on every light in your house, surround yourself with people, but it will find you. And when it does, it will take you, and no one will ever be able to save you from it. The night you saw it, you were walking home from a friend's house. The trail cut through the woods, the only shortcut back to your neighborhood. Your flashlight flickered once, twice, and then it quit working. You cursed under your breath, shaking it, but it wouldn't come back on. The wind stopped, the trees around you stood unnaturally still. Then, the leaves at your feet began to rise, swirling in a slow, deliberate pattern. You felt it before you saw it, a presence heavy and cold pressing against your back. Slowly, you turned toward the bushes to your left. That's when something appeared. A pale, hollow-eyed thing crouched low among the ground. Its head tilted unnaturally as it began to crawl towards you, its skinny hands gripping the dirt like it was ready to pounce. It slowly moved. It didn't make a sound, but you knew it was hunting you. You could feel its gaze boring into your skull. The flashlight slipped from your trembling hands, and the darkness swallowed it whole. When you scrambled to pick it up and tried to turn it back on to illuminate the bushes, the thing was gone, but the air around you felt heavier. The silence louder. You ran, the flashlight bobbing wildly in your hand. It's still not working, though the batteries were brand new. The sound of your own breathing filled your ears, but behind you, you thought you heard something else. The faint crunch of leaves, the quiet snap of twigs. It was following you. By the time you reached your house, you were shaken so badly you could barely fit the key into the lock, but you managed to open it. You slammed the door behind you, locking it, bolting it, shoving a chair under the handle for good measure. The lights in the house flickered as you collapsed onto the floor, your chest heaving, and then the lights went out. In the pitch black, you heard it. The faint creak of floorboards, the soft scrape of something dragging across the wood. You didn't dare move. You didn't dare breathe, but you could feel it, standing there in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on you. They say it only takes you when you're alone, but the truth is worse. It doesn't just take you, it replaces you, and when it walks out of your house wearing your face, no one will ever know the difference, unless they see those pure, black, and hollowed eyes. Every month, like a cursed tradition, your town braced itself for the full moon. No one dared ignore the warnings. As the pale disk rose into the sky, everyone huddled inside the firehouse, a fortress built for survival. It wasn't fear that drove the town anymore. Fear had become routine. By sunset, the firehouse was locked down. Heavy beams reinforced the doors, metal sheets were hammered over windows, and shadows stretched along across the empty streets. Families gathered inside, clutching weapons scavenged from the barns and basements, axes, crowbars, and even fireplace pokers. The moon people came when the moon was full. They looked human at first glance, almost familiar, but when you got close enough to see them clearly, you realized the truth. Their skin was ghostly pale, almost translucent, and their eyes glowed an unnatural, blood-red hue. Jagged, yellowed fangs jutted from their mouths, dripping with saliva as if they were starving. Their hands ended in razor-sharp claws, stained dark from their previous kills. They wore tattered clothes, rags. Really, they barely clung to them. Some still had remnants of everyday life. A tattered scarf, a dirt-smeared tie, a torn dress. No one knew why they only hunted people, or why they ignored the animals that roamed freely. They weren't monsters in the traditional sense. They were worse, an echo of humanity stripped of reason and consumed by hunger. The first scream tore through the night, chilling and piercing. It was always the same, a shriek of agony, like they were in unbearable pain. It wasn't the sound of an animal or a person. It was something in between. Their cries spread through the streets, joined by low, demonic groans that made the hairs on your neck stand on end. You sat there with your family in the firehouse, gripping an old axe, your knuckles white. Everyone else was silent. The only sounds were the muffled sobs of a child in the corner and the occasional scrape of a weapon being adjusted. The walls of the firehouse were thick, but they couldn't drown out the chaos outside. The moon people were coming. They didn't stumble or crawl like beasts. They moved like people, fast, deliberate, and horrifyingly coordinated. You heard the first crash as one threw itself against the firehouse doors. The reinforced wood groaned under the impact, but it held firm. The sound of their claws scraping against the metal locks was almost worse than their screams. A rhythmic grating noise that set your teeth on edge. You knew the routine. They would test every weakness, every gap, every seam in the barricades. They always did. Through a crack in the window boards, you caught a glimpse of one. It stood in the street, illuminated by the cold glow of the full moon. Its head jerked unnaturally as it sniffed the air, its glowing eyes scanning the shadows. It didn't look in pain, despite the screams that tore from its throat. If anything, it looked hungry. Another crash, this one louder. The firehouse walls trembled as more of them joined the assault. They moved as a pack now, slamming their bodies against the doors, reaching clawed hands through any crack they could find. You could see their fingers slipping through gaps, long and sharp, twitching and searching for flesh. The noise was deafening, the screams, the pounding, the scraping. It felt like the firehouse itself would collapse under the weight of their fury. Then the worst sound came. Silence. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough to make your heart stop. The moon people had stopped screaming, stopped pounding. You knew better than to think that they had left. They were clever. They were waiting. The silence was broken by a single shuddering crash. One of the barricades on the side window splintered. A clawed hand shot through, groping wildly. Someone swung a bat, and the pale hand withdrew, but not before leaving a deep gouge in the wood. You could hear them now, just outside the walls. Their groans were low and demonic, blending with the sound of their bare feet scraping against the ground. You imagined them pacing, circling, waiting for a weakness to exploit. Hours passed like this. The firehouse held, but only barely. You swung your axe at clawed hands that reached too far, your muscles burning from the effort. The others did the same, fighting back with whatever they had. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the moon people retreated. Their screams faded into groans, and their groans into silence. You watched as they melted back into the shadows, their glowing eyes disappearing one by one. When it was over, the firehouse was still standing, but the damage was clear. The doors were battered, the windows splintered, and the walls scarred with deep claw marks. You stepped outside into the cold morning air. The streets were empty, save for the signs of the night's chaos, broken fences, bloodstains, and the faint scent of rot. The town had survived again, but the relief was always short-lived. The full moon would come back again, and with it, the moon people. They always did. The stories always lingered in the back of your mind, rumors and warnings that seemed more like eerie fairy tales than real threats. People vanished near the woods, they said. Not often, but often enough to keep your town on edge. No one ever found bodies, only the occasional signs of something unnatural. Deep gashes in the bark of trees, claw marks raked across the earth, as if some enormous beast had passed through. It was the hands people feared most. The ones described in every disappearance. Giant purple clawed hands emerging from shadowy places to grab their victims and pull them into the darkness. No one ever saw the creature behind them, which made you skeptical. Just those monstrous appendages were seen, impossibly large and strong. The woods became a place of legends, avoided after dark by all but the reckless. But soon, you would know the truth. You didn't think much of it that night. The woods were a shortcut home, and the paved road was longer, colder, and far less convenient. The air was crisp, the moonlight faint as you walked along the trail with your friend. The sound of crunching leaves underfoot was oddly soothing. Then came the cold. It wasn't the normal chill of a fall night. It was something deeper, a piercing cold that froze the breath in your lungs and made your skin crawl. The trees around you seemed to lean closer, their branches twisting unnaturally in the faint light. Then silence followed. The chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, all of it stopped. The absence of sound was deafening, pressing against your ears like a weight. You turned your head, instinctively scanning the shadows. At first, you saw nothing, just the familiar shapes of trees and bushes. Then something moved that vibrated the ground. A slithering motion in the darkness. Your heart skipped a beat as you realized what it was. A hand. It was larger than you imagined. Its scaly skin a deep bruised purple. The claws glinted faintly, razor sharp and curved like sickles. The hand reached out slowly, testing the air, its movements deliberate and predatory. You froze, rooted to the spot you stood as terror gripped you. Then came the second hand, emerging from the opposite side of the trail. Together, they reached forward, their claws scraping the dirt with an ear-piercing screech. You and your friend both ran. You were a little faster, your feet pounding the ground, the sound muffled by the oppressive silence around you. Behind you, the large hands moved with horrifying speed, swiping through the air and trees as they reached out for you. The forest seemed alive, the shadows warping and twisting to give the hands more reach. You glanced back, just in time to see a giant hand snatch your friend. It was faster than anything you'd ever seen. The claws wrapped around their torso, lifting them into the air as if they weighed nothing. For a moment, you thought they might scream, but the sound never came. The hand pulled them into the shadows, and they were gone. You stumbled, your legs weak and trembling. The forest seemed to close in around you, the trees looming like silent witnesses to the nightmare. You didn't stop running until you burst out onto the empty road, your lungs burning and your mind reeling. The woods were silent once more. No sign of your friend, no sign of the hands, only the scent of decay lingering in the air. You collapsed onto the pavement, staring back at the tree line, half expecting to see those monstrous claws reaching for you again, but they didn't. You never saw your friend again, and you never went back to that trail, and no one ever believed you. Some nights, though, you swear you can feel it watching from the tree line of your property. When the air grows cold and the world falls silent, you know it's still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for its next victim to snatch.